Yes, another episode which gives us another opportunity to discuss relationship topics. But, from a guy's perspective. Although, much as I do intend on talking about relationships from a guy's perspective on this episode, I feel like this one is more mindset based and it's not even just to the guys. Like, this one is across the board, men and women. We have a bit of a mindset thing we need to talk about that I am going to get into, and that will probably exceed even just the realm of relationships as I go along with the episode. Although, before I can get into any of that, I first want to start things off by talking about a situation that should have been left for dead, but for some reason just had to come back to life because, well, the person that was involved in that situation came back to life. Now, there's a prisoner who quote-unquote died and came back to life, who came through and argued that his life sentence was technically over. Now, whether it was reinstated or whether he was let free is something that I do intend on discussing, but before I can do any of that, you kind of need to ask yourself, like, if this guy's situation is to be believed, then if some beautiful person just so happened to lay her eyes on a married man and that man's heart literally stops because he has seen an amazingly beautiful woman, does that mean that his marriage is over because technically he was dead for a couple of seconds?
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Okay, I know this is a flimsy and basically stupid argument to have, but, just let me entertain myself with this one for a quick second. Like, if you're talking about death, are we talking about, someone who, had their heart stopped, so technically they were dead? Although, at the same time, that means that if for real the shorty does make my heart skip a beat, like I die a little every time I see her, I don't know. On one side, that sounds like a compliment. On the other side, that sounds like hatred. It's actually a little bit interesting. Like, it's actually a bit of a wild statement, and maybe it's just for guys that overthink and overanalyze shit, but it could be something to debate on if you're under the right influence or if you're with people that like to overanalyze shit. Although, with that said, let me just read the quick caption that came with this story, which says, and I quote, "Back in 2019, Benjamin Schreiber, a convicted murderer in an Iowa prison, argued his life sentence expired when he briefly died, claiming resuscitation violated his DNR order. Convicted in the mid-1990s for first-degree murder, he sought freedom after his heart momentarily stopped during a medical treatment in 2015. Despite resuscitation attempts, he argued his death fulfilled his sentence. However, the court dismissed his claim, deeming it unpersuasive and without merit, leaving Schreiber behind bars." End quote. Now, like I said, this would set such a bad precedence because you think of all the convicted felons who've done some very heinous acts, all of a sudden calling up their lawyers and having them use this to get them out. Like, the world would be full of some of the most dangerous people on the planet who probably should have been doing consecutive life sentences. Which kind of goes back to this whole ruling. It actually does carry some weight because technically, if this guy actually was granted a release based on the fact that he was dead for a bit of a while before he was brought back to life, the number of people that would abuse this precedence would be too many to the point where the justice system would quite literally break. Which means that I should probably just leave it at that because it's not really going anywhere and start something that is actually going somewhere, which is this podcast, by using the words that give precedence to all of the things that I talk about on it, which are: welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who believes that he gets a new dick every 7 months. So technically, he probably shouldn't even be having a body count most times. He's a man who likes his women the same exact way he likes his yogurt. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This episode has started with a little bit more death, but I'm about to bring it back to life with a couple of arguments. Because honestly, there's just some things that make zero sense. Like the whole argument that this dude decided to come up with, why he was like, you know what? I died for a bit, so I've lived my life sentence, is probably one of the dumbest ideas that I have had being taken to court. Although, granted, considering that this is the American justice system, there are probably some things that are dumber that have actually gone through. Like, there was a time when I had a story of a woman who had slept with a teenager and she got pregnant and she got a kid. And like a couple of years later, this guy was being arrested on unpaid child support. And yet this guy was technically molested and or sexually abused when the child came. So you're like, how the fuck is it that you expect this guy to pay for child support at like 22, 23 years old, and yet he didn't even want the kid, and when he was being shagged, he was still technically a kid? Like, it's things like those that make me have very little faith in justice systems. Like, yes, they are supposed to fight for the good and for the fair and for, the morally just, or at least the legally just. But a lot of the time you realize that some of the rulings that are made are usually just made on just having a really good argument. And provided you have that, you can use a bunch of dumb shit to justify some more dumb shit and then get something that works in your favor. Although, then again, this is neither a legal podcast nor do I understand the justice system, so I'll just leave it at that and move things on, because first of all, I should have started by saying thank you so much for listening to this episode, and thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I hope you listen all the way till the end, and there's hundreds of other episodes that you can listen to, and if you do want to suggest a topic or you want to give feedback, then the links to the social media are usually in the description below. Now, this episode is supposed to be revolving around relationships and more so the mindset around relationships, but before I can get into the whole relationship side of the mindset thing, I want to first start by talking about something that people usually don't like discussing very often, which is colorism. Now, the idea of colorism, which is, you favoring some person or the other based off of their skin tone or the color of their skin, is something that has happened for eons and decades and centuries even. And the unfortunate reality is, we can't say that it's ending right now, even though we may feel like there are some strides in the right direction. Now, unfortunately, even though we do continue to try and understand and find ways around the issue of colorism, it seems like sometimes people just like adding on to these problems by injecting a layer of deep understanding that isn't really all that deep. Now, I noticed that when I saw a clip posted up not too long ago on the IG page of BNN, which is Edgar Barry's gossip site, if I can call it that, and it was a woman who was busy talking about colorism in Kenya. Now, she had some very interesting thoughts on the entire thing, and I do want to play the clip before I get into them because I found them to be a little bit misled. But before I can say anything much, let me just let it play, then I can get into it. So, without further ado,
napenda tu light skin. It's because you think lighter is better, and most of the time you attribute more feminine traits with light skinned women, and inverse is true. When women say I like a dark skinned man, it's because you think he's more masculine than the light skinned man. And in fact, I have seen a feminization of the light skinned man, and I've watched a lot of colorist content in Kenya. Light skinned men will say that people think he's a simp, he's too soft. Pretty boy, pretty is a feminine word. Why is it being, I'm not, I don't like bringing these conversations because social constructs and nowadays inclusivity. Let's just date it back, okay? Before the inclusivity and all that, pretty if a man is called pretty, he'll feel some type of way. You're calling them pretty boys because there's a feminization of light-skinned men, just as much as there is a masculinization of dark-skinned women. And all these things, who it affects, out of everybody?
The person it usually affects is the people that you stereotype that way, I think. But anyways, that's actually where the clip ended, and I can actually talk about it from there because there's a couple of things I'd like to talk about, which I feel kind of bleed into the whole use of buzzwords and not necessarily understanding the whole basis of all of this kind of comes in with her discussion. Like, starting from the more minor things, first of all, you can't really talk about inclusivity and then you bring colorism. Like, I know inclusivity incorporates the LGBT, it incorporates women, it incorporates disability, but I have not seen people talking about skin color in the whole inclusivity talk. That aside, because I actually don't give too much of a flying shit about inclusivity, I know for a fact the whole pretty boy thing isn't just reserved to light-skinned dudes or to really light guys, because I myself am referred to as a pretty boy from time to time, and I am not light. I'm actually very chocolate, and as a result, that argument also kind of seems to bite the dust. But when you get into the whole masculinization and or feminization in terms of colorism, like, that argument doesn't hold as much water. Like, yes, you can talk about how, like light-skinned people are given more quote-unquote effeminate treatment, or, this whole effeminate stereotype, but it's mostly because they have almost always, or at least it's assumed that they've gotten preferential treatment from the moment they were particularly young, because light-skinned kids usually tend to be more preferred. They tend to get a lot of preferential treatment from a lot of people, and this is something that you can call neocolonization or some other shit, but it is actually something that has happened. So you don't expect them to do hard manual labor, so when you see them doing hard manual labor, then you suddenly feel like, alright, maybe they might not be built for it. So that's why you'd automatically think that they're soft. Now, the flip side of it is some people might assume that the darker people are stronger. And when you look at the communities where very dark people tend to come from, you do find that on a physical level, they might seem a little bit more superior. Whether it's taller, whether it's bigger and stronger. And that assumption does, give some people some level of, alright, maybe that whole argument holds water. But assuming that it's a masculine thing just because they're strong is also a coincidental thing, because it's not like it's masculine, it's just that they assume that these guys are probably stronger, or they probably haven't gotten any favorable treatment, so wherever it is that they've gotten, they have actually put in the work there, because they do not have pretty privilege working on their side, because people didn't think that black was beautiful until recently, and they've pretty much had to work to get to wherever the hell they are. But all in all, do I think that colorism comes with effeminization or masculinization of people based on color? No, I think it's just a color thing and the stereotypes that come from it, and the fact that people were valued differently and had to work differently for where they got. Although, then again, I could be wrong about all of this shit, so I will leave that up to you, because I need to move on to the main topic of this episode, and it involves me talking about relationships and or marriage and the infidelity that happens within them. Although in this particular case, it's a lot less about the act and a lot more about the mindset that it's actually brought with it, and the mindset that people have towards all of this. Now, to give some context behind all of this, I was sent a TikTok video by a friend of mine called Jackie. Mad shout out to you, Jackie. And it was done by a guy who on TikTok goes by Massage by Steve Kenya. And he was busy talking about a situation where some woman had DM'd him, busy talking about how she was in a sexless marriage and she rarely has sex with her man and she doesn't know what to do. And she even gave details about it. Now, this guy, this influencer, if I can call him that, decided to give his advice, which I not only was uncomfortable with, but I felt actually showed a certain mindset that a lot of people have, because there were very few people that actually opposed whatever the hell this guy was saying in the comment section. Now, I am going to let the clip play, then I can get into it, and it's a bit of a long clip, so I managed to clip off some bits that I felt were a bit unnecessary, but either way, you will get the general idea as well as his thoughts on it, so that I can give my thoughts on everything. So without further ado...
Hi Steve, I don't know if this is the place where people send their confessions, but I hope it is here. Anyway, I have been married for 1.5 years and my marriage is sexless. My lord. My lord again. Yeah. At one time I confronted him about it. Na akasema ati it's because of the family planning I was using. Family planning inamuaffect aje umenye ni motoku. You carry us children. I thought things would go back to normal after family planning imeisha, lakini wapi? Yeah? Now, hatuja have sex since around 10th of February. That was before Valentine's. I don't know what to do. Justaki kumuuliza hiyo story tena. Asione kama niko desperate. Please hide ID and advise Wakanyaru here. Are men 12? Are they 12 like the disciple of Jesus? Yeah? And does it mean because you are married, you cannot get resources somewhere else? You are making me angry very much. Mtu hataki kukupea kasusu kake, right? For whatever reasons. Maybe amepata mtu mwingine mwenye anakona mastyle redri, right? Could be whichever reason. Lakini sasa yeye juu hataki, haimaanishi wewe hutaki. Taumaja, get out, go find someone who has libido, someone who has erectile functioning, someone who has mandashus. Are we together? Mtu kama hataki akae, atubembelezi mtu, no. Go find yourself someone. Nafuta mtu wako na mahinya. Are we together? Mtu anaendea uji power, anakunywa, anasikia poa. Are we together? Yeah. Otherwise, hiyo kuteseka unateseka is your wanting. Ni wedding wako, is your wedding.
Okay, so the guy was approached via DM by a woman claiming that she was in a sexless marriage and the man rarely ever sleeps with her, and the guy gave the excuse of family planning the first time, that, you know, the family planning that she's doing is making him less horny, which, you know, I can see why the nonsense exists there. But even after that, he still isn't interested, and she was asking for assistance on what to do, and this dude straight up said, just go and look for another guy who has really good sex drive, who really wants to do it with you and, you know, get your needs met. Which, I don't know. Like, I know I'm gonna lead into saying this at some point, but I'll just say it beforehand. Kenyans have an infidelity problem. Like, there's no simpler way of saying it. Kenyans have an infidelity problem. Although, before I can get into anything about whatever the hell this guy has said and my thoughts on it, let me give the typical disclaimer that I usually give whenever I'm talking about people who are married or anything that pertains to marriage, which is, considering that I'm a single man who has not been married before and has zero prior experience with marriage, everything that I say is purely speculative at best and is not to be taken as pure solid advice. While it can work well as an opinion and can be used for entertainment purposes, do not take it as actual credible advice. Now, with that disclaimer given, now I can get into this entire thing by starting to ask, how the hell is this guy so comfortable recommending someone cheats on their partner, and yet he's a guy and he's telling a woman to cheat on her guy? Like, don't get me wrong, I understand. I'm one of the few guys that's very pro-men. And yes, you know, the whole pro-men thing, it's not like it's a big movement and it's not like every guy is there. But it's not like you commonly see a woman busy telling other guys to go and cheat on their woman. Like, they can talk at the very most extreme about how, oh, you know, men are meant to be polygamous, or men are always polygamous, or you're never with the guy alone, there's always other babes there and shit. But it's not like that, like, you know what, this man should go and cheat on his woman and get another babe. Like, this is something that I mostly hear women talk about. And considering the way he was addressing this entire topic and the way he was talking, I assume that a majority of his audience are women, and that probably did lead him to, you know, being very comfortable saying that, because there's a lot of women who could recommend the exact same thing. Now, speaking of other women who give this same kind of advice, while it's not surprising, it's actually very interesting how nowadays it seems so easy for women to recommend this to other women that I'm actually losing hope in the older women that are supposed to be guiding younger women in terms of making good decisions in their relationships. Like, there's a lot of women nowadays that are recommending acts like this, that are recommending, you know, that the woman goes and gets herself a side dude or a Ben 10 just so that, you know, she can get her satisfaction. And the ease at which they're sharing this information is a little too much that it's actually a bit concerning for me. Now, granted, it's not like guys don't do this with other guys. Guys actually do this every so often. And they not only talk about finding a young babe that, you know, can keep you happy and like help minimize some of the stress that you get at home or some shit like that, but they even endorse and defend it as well. Like, if you go back to the Omanyala story that I was busy talking about 2 episodes ago on episode 492, a lot of guys were in support of Omanyala's supposed infidelity, and they were talking about it in the sense that, oh, you know, men are naturally polygamous. Oh, you know, when a man gets to that level, oh, because he's a Luya man, he should be allowed to be polygamous. Yet the reality of it is, it's not like the babe went ahead and put in a bunch of sacrifice and stuck by the dude from when they were broke all the way till now they had, you know, a bunch of fame and fortune, so that he could suddenly go and get a bunch of other babes when, you know, they've been struggling together. And it's something that you see a lot of guys doing nowadays, which honestly I'm not actually in support of. Which is why I came to the very simple conclusion that Kenyans actually have an infidelity problem on a mindset level. Like, we have spoken about how there's a lot of people that are cheating out here. We have spoken about how everybody cheats, or at least some people believe that everybody cheats, and how we're almost always hearing stories of people that are ending relationships because so and so cheated or is with person X, but at the same time they're cheating with person Y, and someone is discovering that, they're not the only person in that relationship with their partner. Like, we always have discussions like this, and we always talk about real world examples and the stories around it. But what we have now, and you could argue that this is in a lot of places, but I feel like it's more of a Kenyan problem now, is that people are so used to hearing about infidelity that they're now comfortable with it, to the point of recommending it to other people that they don't even know or fully understand. And I'll give you a pretty good example, minus just what this guy had with the babe who DM'd him. I've read stories of how women who suddenly became sugar mummies or picked up a side dude or got themselves a Ben 10 did that because they were in a relationship for like decades or many years with their husbands, but apparently there were issues on like a sexual level or even other issues, and then the friend or the friends recommended that she get themselves a younger guy or just another guy. And it's other women that are recommending this to other women. Like, you see that thing happen, and the ease at which people are recommending it nowadays is a little too much, because people are very comfortably saying, if he's unable to satisfy your needs, then find someone who will. If he's unable to make you happy, find someone who will. And whether you want to argue about that being good or bad advice, at the end of the day, it's very concerning that people are recommending that you go for an extramarital affair at the very least. There's another example of a friend of mine who has a business somewhere around, and while he was busy serving one of the customers, because this customer tends to come with her friend all the time and the friend seemed to be shooting glances at him, she came up to my homie and was like, yo, how comes you haven't tapped that yet? She seems very interested in you, and it's like, you seem like a pretty great guy. And the guy was like, yo, as of right now, I'm kind of with someone and I don't really want to cross that line. And this shorty is like, but what's wrong with that? As long as no one knows, like, it's perfectly fine. Like, this is some shit that we're all doing. And while my homie is busy being bewildered at that point, this shorty is going off about how she's in a relationship with a guy, but whenever they have issues, she goes and she gets piped from another dude that she sort of has as like a sneaky link on the side. And when my homie is busy asking, but what about her and having a boyfriend? And this other baby is like, why is that a problem? Like, if you're getting a chance and she wants you, why not just take it? This is quite literally a stranger to stranger interaction. It's not like they're friends, she's just a customer. So the ease of just recommending that someone cheat on their partner seems so easy to her that she's perfectly comfortable giving it. Which goes back to what I'm saying, which is we have an infidelity problem where we are so okay with it that we're now recommending it to other people as a solution. And yet a lot of these problems can be solved internally between the two of you in that relationship and do not require for you to cheat on your partner. Because interestingly enough, there's a lot of reasons why people end up acting a certain way in a relationship that may or may not be related to the relationship, such that you can make one small change that can absolutely make things a whole lot better for the both of you. And to bring this statement home, I'll use the very same example that started this entire thing, which was the story of this lady and her very sexless marriage. Now, in the case of the guy not wanting to sleep with her, it could be as a result of probably about 3 or 4 reasons, infidelity included. Alright, first of all, there's a very good chance this man isn't happy. Second of all, there's a very good chance this man is under some sort of stress or he's going through something. Third, there could be a very good reason that he has some sort of medical issue that has prevented him from having a sex drive to some degree. And fourth is infidelity. Alright, now the last two aren't that hard to figure out. For infidelity, if you search hard enough, you can probably find the evidence maybe somewhere on his phone in terms of his behavior, yada yada yada. Alright, women are pretty good at that shit, so I'm not gonna start giving details. Then if it's a medical issue, there's a pretty good chance that if you guys go to a gynecologist or he goes to a gynecologist, then he could figure out what that issue is. Or, if there's other issues, you guys can probably find them from a hospital checkup. But now, the other two are a lot harder to spot, and yet the solutions for that are actually probably a hell of a lot easier. Because if he's going through some sort of stress, or he's going through some sort of mental situation, having him speak up, having him talk, which requires you to create a situation, an environment where he feels comfortable to do that, is something that you can actually do, and probably doesn't even require anything in the name of payment. Not unless if you're sending them off for therapy or some version of marriage counseling. Then his happiness, that one just requires you to figure out whether your husband is happy with the marriage, with the family, or even as an individual. That isn't too hard to figure out if you've created an environment where your husband feels open speaking about things with you, which isn't impossible, or, and this one might even seem a little bit hard for some of you guys, actually being his peace. Treating him with respect and giving him peace such that he is a lot more comfortable when he comes home, and as a result, he's a lot more ready to take on the world when he leaves the house in the morning. All of these things are things that you can do instead of you going to find another dude to suddenly screw so that you can make yourself more sexually satisfied. Because I know for a fact, a happy man, a man that is feeling loved and loves his woman, is willing to give it to them as many times as the woman wants. And honestly, resorting to the whole just go find a young dude or go find a dude with a libido to give it to you is such a big cop-out in this entire thing. Which leads me to my conclusion in all of this. We need to go back to getting things done the hard way. The hard conversations that people are refusing to have in relationships, we need to start having them again. The fight to keep the relationship alive that people have stopped having, we need to start having those fights again. Not necessarily physical or verbal, but essentially you putting in the effort to try and make your relationship as great as possible. This whole thing of using infidelity as a solution to whatever marital problems you have is like you trying to work in a toxic work environment and saying that the solution is sniffing more cocaine so that you have the energy to go through the entire day. While it does make it seem like a solution to a toxic work environment, maybe the environment is the problem and that's what you need to fix, not your ability to wade through the waters in that entire thing. Although, then again, considering that this is also speculative information, I could be wrong about this, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the breaktime podcast. And on X, it is at Bagaka_the_D. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.